So we were having our Christmas Eve dinner. Turkey, stuffing, and other dishes that you would expect to get on Thanksgiving night. We don't have a big family. It was my grandparents and uncles from my mom's side of the family. At the time, we lived in a duplex with some guy and his girlfriend on the other side. We never really saw them much. Strangely, we had a door that connected our sides, and no, that's not something that most duplexes have. It had a very unique kind of lock though. It had to be unlocked from both sides to be opened, and it could open in either direction. I only saw it open once before the two moved in, ever since the door had been locked, at least on our side. While we were sitting at the dinner table eating, the doorknob to the door that separates the sides of our duplex twisted and turned before the lock would block it. It was not accidental, as it was going on for at least 10 seconds. My dad got up and walked over to the door, placed one hand on the lock and one hand on the doorknob. "You need something?" There was no answer. He unlocked our side of the door and swung it open. Their side of the duplex was completely pitch black. It seemed as if nobody was home. It was only about 6 o'clock, and we were certain we saw them leaving earlier. Me and my dad went to check out the window, and their car was gone too. Being good neighbors, we assumed the worst, that there may have been an intruder, so me, my dad, and my uncle went to the other side to investigate. We flipped on all the lights and checked every corner and every crevice of the small first floor. Then we heard a thud and a crack from upstairs. It was pressure on the floorboards. I was freaked out, so I stayed behind while my dad and uncle ran upstairs. I felt my heart skip a beat when a huge commotion erupted from upstairs, before the scream from my uncle echoed across the duplex, even to the other side, as my whole family got up from the table now. Moments later, my dad came rushing down with my uncle beside him, with his hand covering his lower shoulder or chest area. There was a stab wound. We all hurried back to our side of the apartment and locked the door. We dialed 911 and simultaneously heard rapid stomping coming from the other side, and then heavy banging and ramming into the door to the point where there were small chips and cracks forming. We could hear the grunting and screaming of the man as he rammed into the door. My other uncle and my dad each grabbed kitchen knives. I armed myself as well. They told all of us to stand back while they waited by the door. Thankfully, the man on the other side gave up before the door gave in, and we heard him exit out the front door. We watched through the window, and we all saw his face as he ran through the snow and turned to see us through the glass. He took off in his black Honda Civic down the slushy roads. It doesn't end there. The following year, the same neighbors still lived there, and they seemed to be having a Christmas get-together with a few people. By chance, I was looking out my bedroom window, being a sketchy snoop, when I recognized one of their guests to be the same man who had allegedly broken into their side of the duplex. When I told my dad, he agreed, and we approached them about it. He denied any knowledge of what we said, and even our neighbors defended him, saying he was from out of state. There was nothing we could do for proof, but we knew one thing. Those neighbors, for whatever reason, set that up. We moved out about a month later after our new-grown fear of those neighbors became too much. This happened when I was only 5 years old. It was Christmas Eve night, meaning I guess it was technically Christmas, and I had awoken at probably 3 a.m. or something. I walked downstairs to the living room out of my little boy curiosity to see if Santa had delivered any presents yet. The tree was full of presents underneath already. I was so happy. Santa had come already. But what was this? There was someone in the kitchen going through the fridge. I remember stepping into the kitchen and seeing a really tall man going through the fridge chugging a milk carton. When he spotted me, he put the carton back in the fridge and shut the door. He then put his fingers on his lips to tell me to be quiet. Are you Santa?" I asked him. "Yes, I am," he told me quietly. He walked past me, patted me on the head, and stepped into the living room next to the tree. I don't know what I was thinking, even at 5 years old, as he wasn't wearing anything even resembling Santa. He looked around at all the gifts. I thanked him for all the presents as he began picking up the bigger boxes. I remember being confused, and I'm pretty sure I asked him why he was doing what he was doing. but I don't remember exactly what he said. I believe it was along the lines of just replacing the gifts with better ones in my sled. I believed whatever he said though. He walked out the back door with 3 boxes, came back momentarily to grab more, then left once again. He came back in and patted me on the back and told me not to tell my parents that I saw him. I smiled and agreed, and he took off with the boxes. I waited for him to come back with the replacement gifts, but he never did. I eventually went up to tell my parents despite what he said. When my parents realized I wasn't joking, they sat up in shock and fear and ran past me downstairs. When they saw half the presents were gone and the back door was left wide open, my mom screamed like a deranged person. I remember my parents were practically scolding me, demanding for me to describe the person who entered our house. Of course, being 5 years old, the description I gave was anything but useful. All I probably told them was that he was tall. It's been almost 15 years now though, and at this point for me, being that I was only 5 years old, it's nothing but a story to tell, rather than a bad memory at all. Did you ever used to have a fear of those guys who would dress up as Santa Claus in the mall or at Christmas parties? Up until the age of about 8, I certainly did. I think I was 6 or 7 years old when me and my mom were walking through the mall with all of the Christmas festivities and decorations up. Festive bands playing jingle bells, a giant tree in the center of the mall, and of course a mall Santa sitting in a chair covered by a green blanket. There was a small line of kids and parents waiting to sit on the Santa's lap. Maybe 2 or 3 kids. My mom insisted I sat on his lap. Normally it would be the other way around, the kid begging the parent to sit on the lap, but she knew how shy I was. There wasn't anyone by the mall Santa's side, like one of those people who calls the next child up. It was just him. When I sat on the stranger's lap, he grabbed me by the chest and said softly in my ear, "What do you want for Christmas?" I think I said a Game Boy Advance. He laughed and assured me I would receive one. Then, for whatever reason, my mom walked up to the Santa and said something quietly to him. He chuckled in response to whatever she said and then said no problem. My mom told me to wait there by the Santa for a few minutes until she came back. At this point, there were no more kids waiting to sit on his lap, so his attention was directed at me. He told me to come over and sit on his lap again. I somehow obeyed, despite my fear of Santa Claus. When I sat on his lap, he pulled me closer to him so that my back was leaning on him. When I think back on this moment now, it's all the more painful and creepy. He then whispered in my ear that he had a Game Boy Advance outside by his sled, and if I followed him, I would get it right now and wouldn't have to wait until Christmas. My fear suddenly turned to excitement as I believed him. We both stepped off the chair, and I followed him down one of the exit hallways, but halfway through, he stopped and told me we should take a bathroom break first. We stepped into the bathroom, and he quickly locked the door. I turned and looked at him as he looked at me. But before anything else could happen, there was a frantic banging at the door. Somebody on the other side was yelling to open up. The Santa opened the door, and a man pulled him out and shoved him. The man then escorted me back to the center of the mall, asking me where my mom went. I watched as the fake Santa casually walked out the exit door and out of my sight. When my mom came back, the man explained everything. I'm pretty sure he was watching the whole time. So he and my mom asked around to see if the mall hired any mall Santas for the day. They did not. Whoever that was just a pervert dressed as Santa to get kids to sit on his lap and possibly wait for a perfect opportunity to snatch one, just like he almost did me. This story took place about 5 years ago on Christmas Eve night. It was around 1 in the morning, and I had just finished placing presents under the tree. I went upstairs to brush up and everything, then came back downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water before bed. My son Jake, who was 4 at the time, was standing by the stairs leading to the basement. I asked him what he was doing up so late. He pointed down the stairs and said, "Santa." I picked him up and carried him back to his room. I took a glass of water and went to bed. I woke up around an hour later to my son running down the hall outside my room. I sighed and got out of bed. As I was going down the stairs, I saw Jake by the tree looking at presents. Then he ran past me into the basement stairs again. He pointed down the stairs again. This time I looked down the stairwell, and my heart dropped as I saw a black figure sitting on the bottom step. I almost screamed, but I somehow held it in. I pulled my son quietly away from the basement door and closer to the front door of the house. I moved my hand away from my son's mouth to reach for the lock in the doorknob. I tried to pull the door open as quietly as possible, but it was pointless. The squeaky hinges let out the usual ear-piercing screeches, and I cringed in my mouth and eyes as I did. Suddenly, there were heavy stomps coming from up the basement stairs. I screamed and pushed open the storm door and practically threw Jake outside. I shut both doors behind us and we ran to the neighbor's house. I rang the doorbell as fast as possible, probably 30 times before they answered. After that, we went inside and stayed there and waited for the police. Whoever that person was gone though, as determined after the police conducted a thorough investigation of the house. I ended up lying to Jake, telling him that actually was Santa Claus, but a few years later, he remembered the incident and became a little more wise to what actually happened. I'll never forget the time me and my brother snuck out past our bedtimes to explore an allegedly haunted house down the block. Yes, I said bedtime, as I was only 10 and my brother Luke was only 12. When our parents said goodnight to us, I went to Luke's room and we took a couple hand-powered flashlights with us and hopped outside through the window. Luckily, his room was on the first floor. Those hand-powered flashlights worked by constantly pushing in a little trigger that would create light inside the lens. They were noisy as hell, but they were convenient. Once we were outside, we just walked down the block, and in 2 minutes we were there. It was rumored by all the neighborhood kids and teens that the place was haunted. Everything about it was creepy. The older, more antique design of the house, the isolation from the rest of the houses, and the broken windows and rotting wood. It seemed perfect for a horror movie. We went around to the backyard. This was all my curious and confident brother's idea. I was scared shitless. The door was locked, as expected. I felt a bit of relief, thinking we might just go home, but my brother made a shocking move next. He grabbed a plank of wood laying in the grass and began smashing the already chipped window. Eventually there was enough of an opening to unlock it and slide it up completely. We hopped inside and began cranking those noisy-ass flashlights. Immediately after entering the house, we both picked up on the fact that it was like 90 degrees in there, which was odd as it was a September night in the mid-70s. There was no graffiti or anything anywhere. In fact, it was relatively empty besides a few pieces of furniture that were clearly not worth taking along. It seemed we were the first to enter the house, shockingly, or at least from the back. We went upstairs to the main floor from the little den area and continued cranking the flashlights. That's when we heard the slightest crack in the floorboards from right above us. We both jumped. I tugged for Luke to leave, but he told me the place is old as hell. It's just house noises. I stopped cranking the flashlight at this point, and I urged Luke to do the same, but he only called me stupid for suggesting something so ridiculous. Then there was another crack in the floorboards from above us. He began walking upstairs. I didn't want to go up there, but I was not about to stay down there alone. I followed behind him to the upstairs. There was a door that led to a room right above where we were standing. I begged him not to open it, but he must have just wanted to be the big, tough older brother. He began to reach for the doorknob while still cranking the noisy flashlight, but then he stopped. I was confused. I could see in the dark he was moving his ear up against the door, listening for something. Silence. Then, the most deafening, nightmare-inducing moment of my life. A single bang on the door from the other side sent my brother staggering into the wall in pain, covering his ear. We dropped the flashlights and ran straight out the back door and back home. We were so loud when we got back that our parents found us out. We told them what happened, but they naturally didn't care and grounded us both for a week. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of something from outside my window and a glare of brightness sneaking in through my slightly opened blind. I sat up, and my heart sank when I realized it was the sound of the crank to my flashlight. I stood up and looked out the window, and that's when it stopped. There was nothing but complete blackness out there after that. I woke the next day barely remembering what happened, and I still hope today that that part was just a dream. This is a story that happened to me recently. I was still in my first year of university, and I've only just made friends with a few other students. Albeit an old and notorious university for its ghostly figures and paranormal activity, the campus janitors and security were all too familiar with unusual reports. The art and design faculty was subjected to the oldest campus of the 4 separate buildings, and the block my class happened to progress in was the allegedly haunted section as well. It was late in the afternoon, just before 5, and my friend needed to use the restroom. She asked me to accompany her, and I obliged, seeing it as an opportunity to rest my eyes from the strains of the projector. She rushed into one of the stalls, and I waited outside the bathroom. Feeling that she would take longer than I initially anticipated, I decided to walk back to class without telling her. As soon as I sat down, she barged into the class, calling out for me. According to her claim, she heard the sink's tap turn on and thought it was me playing a prank. As she opened the door, she saw no one else in the restroom besides herself, yet the other stall next to her was locked from the inside. Thinking it was someone else on the toilet, she asked if it was me. No answer. Curious, she looked down the gap but saw no shoes or legs, yet heard feminine whispers and humming from that particular stall. Frightened, she left without saying another word. Class ended and we went home, but the thought of the occurrence remained. We later learned from one of the janitors that no one should ever be in the restroom after 5 in the evening, as there is a known ghost of a woman who resides in the stalls. Needless to say, as juniors in the university, my friends and I decided to never use the bathrooms after the designated time. I'm not in any way saying these claims are true, but everything I told you is true in regards to what I was told. Whether these things I was told by my friend and the janitor are true or not remains a mystery to me. This happened a few months ago while I was serving in Japan as a missionary for the Mormon Church. I was in the country for 2 years, and my time to return home was approaching. I was in my last area, Kyoto, a bustling tourist attraction, an ancient Japanese city I've wanted to visit all my life. Anyway, it was late at night, and my companion and I were knocking on doors to see if anyone had interest in learning about Christ. We came across this one apartment building and decided to give it a shot. In Japan, there are 3 kinds of apartments: super luxurious suites, decent apartments with 4 to 5 rooms total, or ghetto as crap. This apartment was the latter. We were on the 2nd floor of this building and knocked on this one door. A middle-aged man in worn-out clothes answered with an awkward smile on his face. Being the kind missionaries we were, we introduced ourselves and asked him if he would like to learn about what we believe. Instead of giving us a direct answer, he invited us in. Usually, in missionary work, this is a good sign, but upon stepping foot into that apartment, I knew what we got ourselves into. This apartment reeked with the smell of marijuana and urine. His apartment was puny: a small entryway, a door on the left leading into a bathroom, a small kitchen to the right, and a small multi-purpose room with a small kneeling table, TV, and bed. That's it. Judging by the way he was behaving and most of the decor in his apartment, I knew this guy definitely had some sins worth confessing. He sat us down on either side of the table and started to rant on about how he hates Christians and wants to kill them. That made my companion and I tense up a bit. But the man was plastered. In the time this was going on, he drank like 10 times his weight in booze. We just prayed and hoped he wouldn't recognize who we were and what he was telling us. Then he said, "I'm going to tell you a secret and you can't tell anyone." He then pulled out from under his bed a box. He opened it to reveal thousands and thousands of dollars worth of Japanese yen, and yes, it was authentic. We even examined it. This man was an illegal drug lord who worked with the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia group. We then realized that if this man knew what he just did and showed us, he would kill us for sure, or at least take us hostage. My companion and I feared for our lives and tried to come up with an excuse to get away, but he wouldn't let us go. He kept ranting on about irrelevant things and saying how Christianity was an evil cult of some kind. We tried to explain our side of the story, but there's no use in reasoning with a drunk drug lord who works for the Japanese mafia. It then got to the point where we practically had to run for the door. We said we were leaving, stood up, and quickly walked over to the door. The guy then stood up and began to reach for something in a box, but we never saw what it was. As soon as the door closed, we bolted home, faster than we ever had. The last thing we wanted was him sobering up to find out he had revealed his deepest, darkest secrets to 2 Christian missionaries from America. Had this man not been drunk, he probably would have killed us. For all we know, he was reaching for a gun as we were leaving. When I was 15 years old, I was home alone one night for whatever reason. My bedroom was on the first floor, right next to the living room. It's a strange setup. I had the door shut and was playing video games when I heard a strange sound come out from in the living room. It took me a few moments to figure out that it was a tap on the window. I stepped through the dark living room and out the front door and checked the bushes by the window. Nobody was there. I went back to my room with the door open and resumed playing the game. 5 seconds later, another knock on the glass. This time I ran to the front door barefoot, ready to chase the pranksters. But again, no one was in the bushes. No one was even in sight. I chose to just ignore it from here on out. On my way back to my room, there was another knock. I ran over to the window to try and catch them. There wasn't anyone outside, but I felt something right above the tip of my toes. I looked down and saw the dark shadow of a figure sitting down by the window. I think I was back in my room in a matter of 2 seconds with the door locked. I was hiding under my bed trying to call my dad. The knocking on the glass continued from outside. When I explained to my dad, he called me crazy for not calling the police, so he told me he would for me and to wait in my room with the door locked. I'd say about 5 minutes later, the knocking stopped, and 10 minutes later, the cops arrived. The figure was gone, but there were no signs of entry or exit, as all the doors were locked and all the windows shut. Still, we haven't seen or heard of anything since then, but it's still creepy as hell to think about.
I was at home alone playing Call of Duty between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. During this time, I got a phone call from a random phone number, and of course, the first thing I think of is that it's just somebody who's either prank calling me or just doesn't have the right number. After I hung up, a few seconds later, I received a phone call from the same number. When this happened, I'll admit I felt a little chill run down my spine, but since I was home alone, I was thinking that if this person was just prank calling me, I could say whatever I want until either I or the person hangs up. So I answered it. I said hello in a sort of annoyed voice, but there was no response. Instead, all I heard was something that still freaks me out. I heard what sounded like a cat hissing, but in a much deeper pitch. Of course, out of surprise, I became defensively hostile. I said into the phone, "Look, buddy, if you call this number again, I'll have my friend who's a police officer track this number and arrest you." But this didn't even faze whoever was on the other end of the phone. Instead, all I got in response was disturbing low-pitched laughter. My heart dropped. "Why are you calling?" I said. Then, this is what still gives me nightmares to this day. As clear as day, in a dark, almost demonic voice, I heard,
"I'm just waiting for you to come upstairs."
Without hesitation, I ran out of the house and ran across the street to my friend's house and asked his dad to call my dad while trying to explain to him what happened at the same time. After he called my dad, my friend's dad called the police. They arrived in 5 minutes and found nothing upstairs, but they did find the back door open. My dad used to be a paramedic, and after he retired, he remained good friends with a lot of people, one of them being my godmother, Sally. Sally owned a bunny farm and was very friendly. My family and I loved her dearly, and my parents decided to make her my godmother, but she also had a brother named Terry. Terry was a very quiet man. He never said much and kinda had a weird vibe on him, but he was never around that much, so I didn't give it much thought. It was Thanksgiving, and we all decided to eat together. It was a great dinner, but his presence just really made me uncomfortable. While they were over, my godmother and I were working on the computer my parents used, and I noticed my brother and Terry were in the family room. I went out to see them just watching TV. Nothing was going on. The next day, we all went to church, and Terry asked me if my brother had a Facebook account. I said no, because that was the truth. My brother wasn't into social media, but my thoughts began to wonder why he wanted to befriend my younger brother. At some point he added me on Facebook, and I noticed that his avatar was that anonymous figure. Weird. Why didn't he have his face on his account? I got an instant message from him. The chat went like this. "Hey there," he said. "Hi. What are you doing up so late?" "I'm a night owl, so I'm usually up late." "Doesn't that make your parents mad?" he said. They don't mind," I said. "A naughty girl, aren't we? Staying up late. Would you like to chat?" "Actually, I gotta go now. I have homework," I said, quickly going invisible and closing him out. What the hell kind of chat was that? He was talking to me like I was some slut or something. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to go to his account. He didn't have his friends list blocked, so I was able to see all his friends. What I saw and what I felt that night will always haunt me. He had over 200 friends, and all of them were young men between the ages of 14 to 18. I was so sick as I saw some of the boys were shirtless in their boxers or worse. It's not the fact that he's into men that freaked me out. No, I wouldn't care if he was gay. But this man was targeting young men. Terry was in his 40s. This is why he wanted to know if my brother had a Facebook account. He wanted to add him in his sick boy list. I was shaking as I realized what kind of man this was. I loved my godmother, but this was just sick. I told my parents and reported his account. My dad was shocked, but he also wasn't too surprised, because apparently Terry was reported for selling drugs to kids and touching them on the news one day. I found out the case was dropped because the boys said they were lying, but now I wonder, were they really lying? Since then, we stopped talking to my godmother and her sick brother. His Facebook account was taken down, but I know he's still out there targeting young men. I still have nightmares of him going after me and my brother. My parents recently bought a cabin in the woods and would always spend their weekends up there. My little sister would always go with them, so I spent a lot of time home alone over the weekends. One evening, I was bored out of my mind, so I plopped my butt down and played some Legend of Zelda. Now, over the years of living in this house, I developed some kind of natural reaction. Every now and again, whenever my parents needed me, they would call me from the top of the stairs. And for the record, my room was in the basement. Then I would pause the game or stop what I was doing and walk to the stairs and ask them what they needed. And it happened very often. So often, I keep an ear out for the faintest sound coming from upstairs. This one particular night, as I was playing Zelda, I heard someone call my name from upstairs.
Brandon?
With this natural instinct kicking in, I got up and walked toward the stairs. It wasn't until I was about halfway to the stairs did I remember that my parents were not home. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me or something. I returned back to the land of Hyrule until I heard my name called again.
Brandon?
This time, it was louder, and the voice wasn't my father's. In fact, it wasn't anyone from my family's voice. Maybe a neighbor's? But I know my neighbors well, and I didn't recognize the voice. I bolted upstairs to investigate, shouting for a response. I got none. I looked out the window in our dining room area that gave me a good view of our street. I live in a house at the far end of a cul-de-sac, so we can see every house on the street. Right before the street opens into the big circle of asphalt, there was a dim streetlight illuminating the street. Standing directly under the light was a dark and shadowy figure. I tried to see if I could recognize him, but I couldn't, until I realized something about the man that made my blood freeze in horror. The man had no shadow, and I know that because he was directly under a light source. His shadow would be beneath him, but no. I looked in between the legs. No shadow whatsoever. Suddenly, the streetlight flickered for a split second, and the shadow man disappeared. I then ran frantically around the house, making sure every door and window was locked and secured. I then locked myself in a closet beneath the staircase and played Pokemon on my DS for the rest of the night. Working as a pizza delivery boy, you'll run into a lot of strange things. However, this story may be an excessive example of that. I was 21 years old, and it was a late Friday night shift at John's Pizza, meaning I would be closing with my boss. It was about 9 o'clock, an hour before closing. My next delivery was to the Saugerties, the next town over. The drive wasn't too long, maybe 15 minutes. I was a bit confused. The map was taking me to an isolated road that seemed to lead to nothing. I drove down it anyway, and shortly realized it led to a house by the water. It seemed every light in the house was on. Upon getting closer, I could hear music blasting from inside the house even with my windows shut. Strangely, there were only 2 cars parked in front of the house, at least from what I could tell. It was a pretty wide open property. The front of the house faced the water, so the road, or driveway I suppose, curved around to the front by the water. As I walked up to the front door, I took more notice to the fact that the house was like brand new. I then rang the bell a few times since the music was so loud. I was caught completely off guard when 2 women opened the door, one blonde and one brunette, barely clothed. They had huge, flirty grins on their faces. The blonde woman grabbed the pizza while the brunette handed me a 20. I was about to ask where everyone was, but the brunette called me cute and asked me for my number. I thought I was about to get extremely lucky. After giving her my number, I was about to attempt at getting myself invited in, but the blonde immediately did that for me anyway. I entered the house and picked up on a rather unpleasant odor almost immediately, and there were literally no people anywhere, but I didn't care that much. The 2 women began to lead me upstairs, but unfortunately, this story did not go in the direction you may have hoped it would. I was literally on the 2nd step when a horrifying scream for help came from upstairs. I looked up there and then at the 2 women. They were looking at each other. The blonde one very clearly mouthed the word shit to the brunette. I didn't even really piece everything together at that moment, but I still just kind of instinctively knew to run. I must have looked back like 20 times before I was able to turn around the car and drive back down the long driveway. Looking back through the mirror, I shit you not, at each and every one of the windows in the house, there were heads peering out to me as I drove away. Of course, I called the police on my way back to work and told them to check the place out. They did, and some investigator guy called me back not even an hour later, telling me whoever was there abandoned the place. and that, in fact, it was a brand new, just-built vacant house for sale. It didn't surprise me much. There was no party going on there. That same night, I got a text saying, "We know where you work." That was enough to drive me to quit that job. Since I mentioned a possible victim upstairs to the police, they came to my house to ask a series of questions about the people. I have also had my number changed since then, as I want no possible links to this incident, and I want to live with peace of mind. So it was my last delivery of the night at Domino's Pizza to a house that was about 10 minutes away from the shop. There was a note on the door, which I read after ringing the bell. It said, "To Pizza Guy, please let yourself in and leave the pizza in the upstairs bedroom. Money will be on the bed." Immediately, red flags were springing up in my head all over. I actually called my boss and told him I didn't feel safe going in there, and he actually told me it would be best to just go inside. I tried to use my charm, as people say I have, to persuade my boss, but he was hell-bent on me not bringing back that pizza. The door was unlocked, so I let myself in. It was an average-sized house with some furniture that seemed a bit aged. There was a small nightlight shaped like a candle on the wall, providing just enough light to see a bit into the living room and my way upstairs. There were no lights in any of the rooms up there, just another candle nightlight. More red flags going off in my head. I come to the end of the small hallway upstairs. There are two doors, one open, one shut. The open door leads into a dark room, which I had to guess was the bedroom. As you may imagine, I was shaking in my shoes, afraid for any sudden sounds or movements anywhere. I pushed the door open completely and pressed my hand against the wall looking for the light switch. Found it. I flicked it on. Nothing. The lights didn't seem to work in this room. I very slowly walked over to the center of the room until something cushiony stopped my leg. It was a bed. I placed the pizza on the bed and began to search for the money in the dark. Just then, I heard the faintest, quietest thing come from outside of the room. I lifted my head and then resumed searching even faster. I was hoping to God it was just some kind of old person living here and they were too sick or nervous or whatever to meet someone. I found the money. It felt like 2 bills. I hoped they were 10s. I put them in my pocket and left the room. I stopped outside the room and saw the door to the other room was open. I could have sworn it was shut earlier.
Your pizza's on the bed. Have a great day.
I myself could hear the shake in my voice. There was no kind of response. I started to lean into the dark room to maybe get a better view. Too dark. I reached my hand into the room and searched for a light switch, but something grabbed my arm with a painfully tight grip and tried pulling me into the room. I screamed and jabbed at the arm with my keys, finally breaking free and getting back to my car. Nothing chased me out, nobody followed my car. I told my boss about it, and even talked him into giving me a raise for making me go through that hell. He didn't want me to call the cops for whatever reason. It wasn't really on the top of my mind, but in hindsight, I guess it would have made sense to get the police to check that place out. Anyway, not everything was terrible. I did get my pay raised from $7.50 to $8.50. I was never the delivery boy when I worked at Gino's Pizzeria, but when the new kid called out sick on like his second day, I had to take over for the night. It was a slow Tuesday night for deliveries, so it wasn't too bad. I had a manual 1998 Ford Mustang, a gas guzzler, so I in no way wanted to beat that car around town delivering pizzas. I made 3 normal deliveries within 3 hours. The place closes at 9 on weekdays, so I estimated 1 or maybe 2 more deliveries for the night. I picked up the phone to a customer who sounded like the definition of a meth head or something. She had a raspy voice, she stuttered, she forgot what she was saying, she had long pauses. Literally, there was like a 10-second gap between her saying, "Can I just get a..." and regular pizza. It was a huge production just getting the address from her. Sounded like she was asking someone in the background what the address was. Well, I was just so excited to meet these people. After she gave me the address, she hung up without me even telling her the price or how long. I told my chef, whose name was actually Mario, I know, a bit cliche, 1 regular pie. 10 minutes later, I was on my way. We live in the middle of absolute nowhere, so each delivery was a longer trip with a bigger tip. It took probably 10 minutes for me to get to the location. There was a long and dark gravel road through the woods and occasional trailer homes I had to drive through until I finally reached their home. It was a trailer home. The lights were off inside, but I could see the orange glow of a fire coming from out back, and I could hear a woman yelling at someone. When I shut the passenger side door after grabbing the pizza, I noticed the curtains to one of the windows move. Somebody was just watching me. I didn't know if I should knock on their door or go around back. It sounded like there was more than one person back there, so I decided to just go around back. I greeted them, and they spun around faster than a bullet. They were disgusting. They looked like typical trailer trash meth heads. The woman looked at, I'm guessing her husband, and asked what he's doing here. He then scolded her, saying she was the one who gave the address. They seemed to be standing close together to hide something behind them, and quite frankly, I didn't want to see what it was. I asked them if I should go around front, and then they whispered something to each other. The woman pointed at me and told me to wait there. She would go get the money. She went inside, and for the next 2 minutes, I awkwardly stood there trying not to stare at the scary-looking guy, who I knew was staring at me the whole time. Finally, the woman emerged from the house and went back next to the man. She handed the man some money and asked him to count it. She whispered something after that. I was getting very nervous now. I felt as if they were going to try and rob me or something. I wasn't stupid. The man started counting the money very slow. I mean, really slow, like 5, 10. I kept my eyes on the woman. She was looking into the woods behind me. And then she nodded her head, staring off behind me, and saw some huge guy approaching me with an axe in his hand. I flung the pizza box at him to try and slow him down, and somehow it worked. Or maybe he just didn't chase me. I got home safely. I didn't even go back to work that night. When Mario the chef texted me, I told him what happened, and all he said was, "Holy shit." That was it. I'm happy that was the only night I had to deliver. So if you live in the suburbs or city, sure, be a pizza boy. But if you live in the middle of nowhere, maybe try the supermarket instead.